today. So with that, I'll go ahead and welcome Joe to the stage, ask you to go ahead and share your presentation, and we'll go through that. And remember, put any questions that you have in chat or save them to the end. And here we go. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Indeed.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I just putting up a map of where our refuge is. Forsythe National Wildlife Refuge kind of spans various parts of the Barnegat Bay down to Great Bay and the Little Egg Inlet area. We're a really nice coastal counterpart to the Pine Barrens. Kind of plug into the to those watersheds there. And about 80% of our almost 50,000 acre refuge is salt marsh. So a lot of our efforts are focused on salt marsh and the critters living in them. Today I'll just tell you what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to talk about this work.
Because I mean,
work we've been doing with compost as a complement and alternative material for raising marsh elevation and sculpting topography. And then I'll talk about why we would want to try to incorporate these new materials, newer materials. And this material that we're working with is simply the leaf litter that municipalities collect. And rather than put it in a landfill, they make compost out of it and then repurpose it in other ways. And we've been fortunate to work with our local county, Ocean County, to repurpose some of that compost for restoration. I definitely want to thank our field assistants who have been scrambling to collect data that I could present for you today on the first full growing season of some of our biggest chunk of work at a site in the upper Barnegat Bay called Good Luck Point. And they were out there last week just ahead of Erin because we know this site goes underwater, even with a regular full moon tide with a little wind behind it. So they were out there as the waters were rising, collecting elevation and veg cover data. Incidentally, this is a really cool waterlogger tool. We've been using at this site from a company called Hi-Fi, and it's a above water long-term logger that's really useful. In this case, we can plan our field work better before driving an hour and finding out our site is flooded. But great tool. A lot of, I think what we're focused on in the Northeast with marsh restoration and certainly at this refuge is to expand and restore high marsh habitat, particularly for the federally listed eastern black rail and the candidate species salt marsh sparrow. And so that's where a lot of my focus has been lately is like, how do we get this habitat in a quick enough timeline for that will benefit these birds who are, they're on these lists because they've already lost a lot of habitat. So, time is urgent. And so I'm kind of like going backwards through the timeline of our journey toward using this material and figuring things out. And so one of the last things we did was just to create about a 1/10 of an acre area of compost in what is otherwise a big pond that used to be salt marsh. This is a very microtidal site, very vulnerable to change, and it's showing it by losing a lot of marsh to open water. Despite that, the site continues to be occupied by black-railed salt marsh sparrow, and so continued work here is clearly needed. So this was kind of a work area that we had for moving compost into different areas of this site. And just as sort of an extra afterthought, we just turned the work area into a little larger placement area, planted it with the plants that we had left over from planting everything else, and watched it grow. And these are nursery plugs. And then so this is the end of last season, and then here is this season where we've got just an incredibly lush production of Spartinopetans. It's ready to have a picnic on. So so this is kind of what we're going for, on a larger scale. So we've like kind of figured it out on a smaller scale, and now the goal is to figure out ways to scale up a little bit. But now I'll just move backward through our process. It just started with little small features, something that we could just get at the dump with a pickup truck. So this is I think 2 pickup truck loads. This was our first little test, and now we've been watching that since 2023. So I guess we've got 3 growing seasons for this little plot. And if you watch this little sign here, it's interesting to watch the entire footprint of this thing expand into the pond. So that it just has this kind of halo effect. And in the original placement area, we've got a really nice root mat of plants now. So you can see we have erosion control cloth that we used initially. It's pretty degraded by the second season, but by then the plants, if you plant, they take over from there. We do have some frag growing in there, and that'll always be an issue if you're going high with anything. And so we replicated this process 200 and something times, using an airboat to deliver the material in a way that wouldn't churn up the salt marsh or peat base layer that was left. And then had a whole bunch of help from colleagues who volunteered their time to help us grade these mounds that the airboat dropped, put blankets on them and buckle them down with stakes. And then we later planted them. Again, with lots of help, lots of sore knees. And then since then, we've been watching things grow. We use reference data from our water loggers and current elevations of plants to set a target elevation. Here it was about 1 foot, now D88. And we set our mounds. This was, it wasn't necessarily a restoration project. It's still kind of an experiment. So just doing with a small amount of money, small amount of material, doing as much as we can with it to learn from it. And so we put some of the material on dredge placement that had previously happened at this site, because I think that's a really intriguing possibility, is to combine this material with dredge material to get, to meet multiple goals and maximize our, the marsh function we're getting. We placed some in already, still vegetated areas, just to raise the elevation, and then some in, some in ponds, obviously. So we ended up with 223 of these features spread across 6 acres, comprised just 400 cubic yards of material that the dump graciously brought to us at this site. And yeah, so we planted everything last year, and so this is the first full growing season we're looking at. And our big questions were, will this material break down? Will it settle? We did test the material, basic soil testing. It's about just about 30% organic matter, so it's a pretty soil-like material. It's pretty broken down. And then we also did greenhouse gas flux measurements with colleague Charles Schutte from Rowan University, just to see if there's anything strange happening, with methane or anything else, but nothing out of the ordinary, behaving like normal material. And so these are our rough, hot off the press results, just seeing if, how we've done over the last year. So this was our target elevation was 1 foot right here, and so we met that, with some ending up lower, some ending up higher. A lot of times we found that, placing it in open water, you had to keep adding material to get to that target elevation to start with. And we did see some erosion in those areas. Depth of placement was only about 6 inches. And that's the other sort of selling point, I think, for this, using this material is it's kind of a finisher. You're not going to fill like a an old impoundment that's lost 2 feet of elevation. It's really just a finishing touch to, sort of sculpt the topography. Or in this case, the site is so microtidal that like you could take something that's open water, you can take it to high marsh with just 6 to 8 inches of material. So there's that opportunity. But yeah, in combination with dredge, you can use the dredge to do the literal heavy lifting of getting up to, a vegetated elevation, and then potentially, use it as a finisher to get it a little bit higher for high marsh elevations. Here's elevation change. So here's the real crux of things, at least over the last year plus. Yeah, they've been pretty rock solid. They haven't changed much at all. This 1.2 inch span here is really within the range of error that our RTK GPSs have. So most of them stayed put, even the ones that were in the ponded areas. So that's good news. So no sort of unusual decomposition or settling that we weren't expecting. And then revegetation. So we've been out doing plant cover measurements, and that's going well. It's all pretty predictable. Like the things that hit the target elevation where we're higher, we're doing fine. This is kind of a threshold we could see in our data. Thing where we hit lower, they weren't doing as well. Which also is fine. We were expecting some to end up low, some to end up high. And in those lower ones, we expect spartina alterniflora to colonize. So yeah, here's an example of a low one that's got, some bedraggled spartina patens growing on it. But then, yeah, you can see some colonizing spartina alterniflora. This is as Aaron was moving in. Here's one mound that you got high enough that it's still, in the pond. Here's one with all dead plugs. Just, yeah, but it really all ended up with elevation. I looked at, a few different variables, but really is all about that elevation. It's just another example where we placed on dredge material. And it's an important point. If you go to, if you fill all that growing space with dredge material, then you can't add much to the top. So in this case, the base elevation was so high, we could only add, a couple of inches of compost, and it didn't seem to be enough, for the vegetation to take. And, I'll get into that in a bit. That's part, largely the motivation for doing all this is that this dredge material here is very, very slow to revegetate it on its own, and planted plugs of spartina patens die. So that's kind of the impetus of it all. And that's what we'll get into in this part. It's just a little area that's still unvegetated in the dredge placement area with coarse grained sand. And so at the time, it's about a small dredge placement, about 6 acres, I think, at the same site. And I started then with monitoring by doing test plantings of, just small numbers of plugs and plots, just to see what happened. And like I just mentioned, patens failed to thrive in the dredge material. It did a little bit better at the edge, at least for part of the season. It was just one season, but then it didn't make it. Here's what those plots would have looked like. So, we would be at the same elevation right next to pre-existing vegetation, but alterniflora just generally seems to do better as long as it's at the right elevation. And in this case, this kind of site, they both kind of overlap. They really divide by growing conditions. And so then, it just led me to just more explorations of like trying different materials and pots. And that's what led to the trying compost out there. And then we saw them do well. Spartina patens do well in that. Also in upland sand, which is complicated because that dredge material, it's a lot of it's pretty sandy. But I think there's something about the airspace, in the grains, salinity. We're not entirely sure. Working someone I'm working with, Shelby Reinhardt from University of Rhode Island, we're working on a meta-analysis of dredge placement projects to understand, these patterns of revegetation more broadly. But they're also doing on-the-ground field work to understand why aren't these plants growing in this dredge material very well. And one of their grad students is working at one of our sites on the refuge. So more to learn there. And then, yeah, silty material didn't do well. And so, yeah, so combine, the failure of plantings to do well or colonize dredge material very quickly, and then the urgent need for creating this habitat pretty quickly is where, like the space I'm thinking and working in. Because, yeah, we've learned the biggest change in our marshes on the New Jersey coast is spartina Peyton's conversion to alterniflora. And so it's the clearest sort of indicator that things are changing and we need to do something. And like I mentioned earlier, our endangered species are responding to this loss that's happened over the last 50 years to a century. And so that, yeah, current restoration effort has to meet that need. It can't meet the need 25 years from now or 50 years from now, because then it'll be too late for these species. And so, yeah, so right now that creation of high marsh using dredge material is we don't know what that timeline is, when these habitats will be suitable for these species. There's our salt marsh sparrow peeking out through some Peytons. And just mentioning the reason we're losing, so much spartina Peytons is not all because of sea level rise. It's also in interaction with the legacy of ditching, which is widespread across the Northeast, which makes our marshes lower and wetter and flatter, and then also impoundment, which has had pretty profound effects on marshes. And then, just mentioning that in New Jersey we have tens of thousands of acres of unditched marshes, which are a really great resource for understanding, how marshes respond to sea level rise, apart from these direct impacts that people have had on marshes, and how marshes design themselves and evolve over time and adapt. And I definitely take a lot of lessons from these marshes. Here's one beautiful unditched marsh in Barnstable, Massachusetts, that I got to visit last fall. And just more about, our work, the work that's happened in the Northeast and New Jersey, over the last 10 years, really, since Hurricane Sandy. This is from a report from some of the earliest projects in New Jersey. Just, kind of repeating what I've just said, is that it's hard to get, even though the project goals are about making high marsh dominated by spartina Peytons, it was not easy to do, and it hasn't been, that goal hasn't been met yet. We have our own experience at the refuge at another site called Cedar Bonnet Island. This is what you're looking at here. This bare area is a designed high marsh component of a project that actually graded down an old dredge pile, but it really replicates a dredge placement. And this was, a very well designed and well executed project that, again, started from scratch, grading down a dredge material area. Put tidal channels in, designed these central areas to be high marsh, and then surrounding areas to be spartina alterniflora dominated. They were planted, fully planted with the target species at a high density, with goose protection, mesh, and everything. And over time, yeah, the low marsh component has done very well, and the higher marsh component has kind of flagged. It's kind of reached a plateau at this point. And it's really, we've done a lot of baseline work in this marsh over the last summer with birds, and it's really gratifying to see seaside sparrow, clapper rail, willet, all nesting in this place that was, truly not habitat for them, 10 or 11 years ago. But what is absent is salt marsh sparrows, the main indicator of our high marsh habitat. So this site's a place where we're really excited to take the compost idea to next, because it's just completes what is an almost complete restoration project. So yeah, there it is again. And so now I'm gonna get into the larger evaluation of dredge projects, just to see if this pattern I'm talking about, is widespread. Because really I'm going from my direct experience, just looking at a lot of, as many projects as I can see. And I'll show you some pictures of what I see on the ground and, what I think is going on. So this is what I think is going on. When we put our material at a regularly flooded elevation, say up to the mean high water mark, Spartina alterniflora knows what to do with that material. It can colonize it. It can revegetate it, even without planting. But in this zone that's supposed to be where our high marsh is, that's where things really stall. And then when we get really high, into like that above the spring tide line, that's when we see vegetation grow in really quickly. And so, this sort of donut kind of phenomenon, kind of can lead to a lot of confusion, especially because Spartina patens can easily grow up into this zone as well. So a lot of projects end up, looking some combination of this with the different bands of growth. And just here's some examples. So here we have our storm flooded bushes, some frag, our bare band, and then our Spartina alterniflora. This is Cedar Bonnet Island again. So these are sites in New Jersey and Rhode Island. Here's another one. This one was mostly storm flooded elevation, but the apron that kind of hit that irregularly flooded elevation, still shows that bare area. At any rate, yeah. So this pattern to me, seems widespread across numerous sites. This is just one in New Jersey that was strictly a Spartina alterniflora restoration project. Showed pretty good revegetation rate over time. And then this is just something I did in a natural overwash at our refuge. We have a sand spit that got overwashed heavily by Hurricane Sandy. And so I just looked to see if a natural overwash, whether revegetation was just as slow as some of these unnatural, dredge placement events. And it was. So within that, that zone I'm talking about, the high marsh zone, it was, revegetation in this zone under this natural setting is also very slow. Again, it's not exactly clear why it takes so long for high marsh to colonize these areas. So if we turn this schematic into a data graph, it would look something like this: a U-shape prediction with, if we have elevation on the x-axis and the rate of revegetation on the y-axis, across some elevation band, we would have a U-shaped pattern. But this is where it gets really tricky. Even talking to practitioners, working on other projects, sometimes it's hard to, talk about these elevation zones. Like I might say high elevations are slow to revegetate, and that might be someone else's low elevation. So anyway, I made an effort to try to get these projects on a similar scale of elevation. So get those tidal datums, get those elevations, target elevations on a similar scale. And it's nothing fancy really. It's so what I did was I subtracted the target elevation of the project, subtracted mean high water from the target elevation of the projects, divided by the tidal range. So that tells you what percent of the tidal range is the target elevation above the mean high tide line. It's just, so what is the magnitude of elevation above the mean high tide line? That's kind of what it is. And then I just found out that recently that another study basically came up with a different metric that is exactly correlated. And this is a map. So this could be really useful for helping compare projects as we move forward, because I think this will be really helpful to just get all projects on a similar scale, so they can be compared, more directly. So in this case, I cobbled together what I could from our sites in New Jersey, data-wise. That's tidal range, target elevation, and some pace of revegetation. And then I've been adding a few sites from other places, and we'll continue to do this. This is a work in progress, as part of a more formal meta-analysis. So most of these projects were, essentially starting from scratch. You're not having existing veg do much of the work. You're just starting from scratch, and they range from 2 to 10 years, as far as since completion. And they have a range of vegetation cover from 0 to 100% in some cases. And this is how it looks so far. We do have a bit of a U shape. Again, this is that standardized metric, increase in elevation above mean high water. And then what's really cool is that you can also put the tidal datums on a common scale. And so everything gets to go on a common scale, so you can see, okay, these projects were really high. These projects were in that Spartina patens, where it naturally would be in the high marsh. And then these projects are, down, in, well, I guess, yeah, this entire area would be more of a Spartina patent zone, and then you're getting into Spartina alternative flora over here at the 0 mark. So yeah, so we do have a bit of a U shape, and again, this is subject to change as we add more data. And just a reminder about what we've got in this zone is our Phragmites, our Spartina patens, our bushes, and you can get some really nice looking habitat. But my guess is it's successional. Places I've seen like this, this is a lot of Spartina patens, but then you see bushes coming in, and so it may just be a transitional phase. And yeah, I'm just pointing out that Spartina patens is this, at least in the mid-Atlantic here, it grows in dunes as well as it does in marsh. So it's not really limited by elevation. So it'll go as high as you want. It just, will, occasionally get outcompeted at those high elevations by other species like dune grass, bushes, frag. These are the projects that had Spartina patens as their stated goal creation. And I think they some of these planted it, some of these naturally colonized, and then all of these planted Spartina patens. So I think, yeah, confirming that pattern I saw, and with my own experience, that the plantings die at this higher elevation or this mid elevation zone. And then, yeah, when you're getting into this zone, you're getting Spartina alternative flora. And then I'll just keep saying to be determined, but this may be a linear relationship, but it also may be a threshold, like this. Time will tell. But at any rate, yeah, the next step is to figure out what it is, going on. Is it aeration? Is it salinity? Is it moisture? Is it extremes of all those things that cause it to be a hostile environment for plant colonization? So in the meantime, this compost material is not a hostile environment. So in this same zone, if you put the compost there, the plants thrive. And so that's this, the stopgap to figuring out what's wrong is just, doing what works and figuring out why later. Another thing that I think confuses, our understanding because of, how well or not well dredge material, gets to our goals and on what time frame is plot-based studies versus, restoration scale studies. My impression is that plants do better, recovery happens quicker, in these smaller patchier treatments, even if you might go thicker with the material. You just have all that surrounding material, vegetation and environment to buffer that patch. And so I realized recently that I could take all the data from this study and put it on my scale and put it on my graph. So that's what I did. And I think this bears out that what I'm saying, that plots do better, at least in some cases, this section here. So this is like a dredge simulation at the plot level doing better than a restoration scale project. And then everything up here, we'd expect to do well no matter what, when you get into these higher zones. So at any rate, yeah, that's like data validation. And interestingly, this study did not put all their projects on the same scale. They're they were really just, it was, hard to compare them this way. So anyway, intriguing to me anyway. I love to point out this accidental experiment where we're up in Plum Island estuary, ice rafting dropped a bunch of sediment on high marsh. And this is just an incredible proof of concept that a very thin layer placed in a patchy way, this high marsh knows what to do with that. So within one growing season, that sediment was swallowed up by the existing vegetation. So anyway, it just tells me the way nature places dredge material, nature knows what the ecosystem knows how to handle it. But yeah, like the way we've been putting dredge material down, it's overwhelming in some way, and it is more like an overwash, which even in nature kills marsh and favors a beachy or dunier environment. Okay, how am I doing on time? I just have one little module left, but we could leave it off and hold off here.
Good.
Am I good?
Yeah.
Okay. So this why use this compost material? Like, it's just the last rationale really is we get results with the vegetation more quickly, but also for me, I'm having an increasing recognition that it's not just elevation that's important for marsh restoration, but it's the topography, like how those elevations are arranged. And so just having a simple flat line target elevation, is not ideal. This is but it's difficult to get like subtlety with dredge material. So that's the hard part. Here's an example from our refuge. It's about a 6 acre project that put silty material into this area. It looked like this before the material got put in there. So highly degraded, in desperate need of intervention. This was a very well executed project. It met its target goals. But including high marsh elevation, although I think you get a little bit higher, a little bit lower. But what I see is it's a lot of like we're going to have a lot of like standing water, a lot of like it's just sort of a ad hoc topography that I would like to go in as a second phase and then terraform it a little bit. Sculpt it, design it so that it drains after the marsh floods. And that's essentially why I think topography is important, because it helps the marsh drain after a flood. Because water that gets into these areas, it comes from things like Hurricane Erin, it comes from winds, it comes from tidal surge, but there's no great force of nature that pushes it back out. The thing that pushes it back out is gravity. And what I see in some of these unditched marshes is, sublime. I'll say it. This is another example I show a lot from a salt marsh restoration manual from England that shows the varied topography that I think I see in our marshes, where you have highs and lows in close proximity that yield to well-drained surfaces that they point out. And it's in contrast to the textbook model of like marsh zonation. Like there's not, many marshes, at least in my neck of the woods, that drop out this way, where your highs and lows are not in close proximity. They're far apart. Yeah, it's more like more broken up, and yeah, I think the habitat needs of birds like black rail are also met more by something like this, where the highs and lows are close, because that bird likes a high elevation to nest in, but it likes low elevation to feed in, and then it likes things of different wetness and at different times. But yeah, so we need, but nonetheless, we need slopes to drain. I guess I put this in, and this is an example, a real world example of an attempt to build topography, but the base elevation of the project was already really high, so that there wasn't room to make higher ground that's still going to be salt marsh. So this is becoming bushes and frag. So it's just a reminder that the dredge projects need to be designed with a more conservative elevation goal, if it's part of the plan to add something else to the top to sculpt things a little bit more. So back to topography as a drainage, as serving a drainage function. This is the latest thing I've gotten into. Is at first I was realizing topography is important, but then I've started to discover there's actually gradients across this varied topography, and this is where we so this is an unditched marsh, and so what you have is isolated areas far from tidal channels, often have ponds. But then in these isolated areas next to the ponds, that's where your highest elevation marsh is, furthest away from channels. And then when you do like an RTK profile across these, pond edge to the nearest channel, you get something that looks like this. So you get a varied topography, but it trends down. So as a result, this marsh after a big flood drains really nicely. Even, something that's very far from a channel, you're not having standing water for very long, because the water either goes into that pond or it goes into that creek. So anyway, it's something that our ditch marshes very clearly lack. And just to show you more evidence of this, I've been using these moisture sensors, which I think are a really very useful tool for actually measuring restoration results, because I think a lot of what we're trying to do is reduce saturated soil conditions. And these measure that really well. Let me show you. So I started by putting them in different topographic positions. So this is a peak, this is a little hollow, little low area, this is a ridge, and just to see how moisture varied. But I also realized, this is also in the context of that sloped elevation profile. So everywhere I go in these unditched marshes, I find this slope thing. It's widespread. But here's our little loggers going, in the different sections. But they show a tidal signal, which is really interesting. Even if the marsh is dry, there's like a little tidal pulse happening all the time. And so in these, so these sort of peaked areas, they show fluctuation. They show flooding and draining with real high tides. And then the hollow areas show like a more constricted, wetter signature. So really cool, just like within a matter of meters, you've got all this diversity of moisture patterns. And what this leads to is diversity of habitat, diversity of vegetation. So it's, sort of good for everything, but good for the vegetation as well. But then we go to the adjacent ditch marsh, and it's much flatter. This is topography again. The elevation profile is flat or concave when you go from channel to channel. There aren't very many ponds, except these saturated areas will eventually become giant ponds, and over that same time frame, just saturated soil moisture. And again, I think this is a direct result of that topography. There's just no way for that water to get out once it gets in. And, it's something we can yeah, solve with, resculpting the topography of these places. Here's just an example, and then I think I'm finished. This is an example of a marsh that's healing itself really well. Like, so basically there's all these old ditches that filled in. And so it's kind of like part of the job is like healing ditches. But the next part of the job, now you have this isolated area that just collects water and can't shed it. So essentially, yeah, you can use, material, whether it be some dredge material or compost to raise elevation and get that slope topography back. And yeah, that's where I'll end and look forward to further discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. That was a great presentation, wide-ranging, a lot of excellent topics covered there, and I see that it has sparked some good discussion in the chat. And so I think, maybe we will start a new hashtag, based on the last component there, like hashtag topography matters, to carry through some of these things. So if you do have questions for Joe based on the information he just presented, just go ahead and raise your hand. I don't see any questions in chat right now that are directed to Joe, but okay, Linda, I see you've got a question. Go ahead and take yourself off mute and join us in the video world.
Hi, I'm all very new to this whole salt marsh restoration world, so I hope these aren't too basic questions, but I'm wondering about the nature of this compost. Many of our communities in Massachusetts also collect leaf litter from, the sidewalks, and, people can just rake it to the side and they pick it up. And I'm wondering how decomposed is this compost that you're applying? It's not fresh leaves, I imagine. It's been cooking for some time. Could you elaborate on
Yeah.
how broken down that is? And I'm also wondering if some of the tree seeds and things don't start sprouting in that mix as well, or does it need to be cooked enough to kill that stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, the word compost can be misleading because but this material is, and I'm sure it can vary depending on who produces it, but this county, has a industrial scale operation, and the material they're creating is, very well composted. I mentioned it earlier, but we did soil testing on it, and it's only 30% organic matter. So it's very soil-like. It's not too far from what the native marsh soil is, as far as organic matter content.
Do you have a sense of how long it's been composted? Is it after one season? And the makeup, is it, what kind of trees or?
It's mostly leaves. I'm not sure. Yeah, like I'm not sure what kind of leaves exactly, but it's what they collect from the community. I'm not sure how long it takes them to produce it, but I know they produce large quantities that they mainly sell to companies that make soil, like soil mixes.
Okay. And so you haven't had undesirables growing up, like
No,
invasives or anything like that?
no, it's not too much of a try. We're working in that saltwater environment, so a lot of it, even if it is there, can't establish itself.
Okay.
Yeah, so that isn't much of an issue. I'm sure, certain, you know, they test it for contaminants and heavy metals and things like that before they, send it off anywhere. But yeah, there may be other things. It's screened, so there's not a whole lot of uh, additional trash. So it's pretty clean stuff. But I'm sure it can vary, depending on the source.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see there's a question in chat, and then we'll go to Jonathan. So, Joe, what are the moisture sensors that you use?
Okay, those are I guess I'll put a link in the chat.
Okay, great.
Yeah, they're from the Czech Republic. They're about $100 each. They have a big community using them in different research settings. They haven't been used in salt marshes that much yet. And I'm sure we'll learn something about them, but they have a 15-year battery life, and they're designed to be put out in kind of large quantities across different ecological gradients.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Jonathan, welcome.
Yeah, good morning, Joe. Thanks for the presentation. I think, some of the things you described certainly match up with what I've seen in the field in terms of marsh morphology and, ponding and where ponding occurs and, drainage. I think those are great lessons learned, and certainly the compost piece is interesting. I had a follow-up kind of on Linda's question, just based on my personal experience with like municipal generated compost. Where did you guys notice, like plastic pieces and stuff? I'm sure it varies again county to county, but just working with that stuff in other settings, I've found a lot of plastics in there, and just curious if you guys picked up on that, or if there was any concerns around anything, or if I guess you mentioned contaminant testing, if there are any concerns around anything else found in there.
Yeah, that's what I've been looking for. Like, like where are there any red flags along the way? And nothing's come up to date. There is some trash in there. Occasionally they screen it, but yeah, there's little fragments of trash. But similar for dredge material, there's a lot of junk that comes up with the dredge material too. And then PFAS is, I think, a widespread, issue. I know I've been trying to learn about the compost industry, and I know that's like a big panic, is that everything is contaminated with that stuff. And so it's like a potential threat to the industry because they just can't avoid it. And so, there might be further things to unravel here. But yeah, at least as far as the results go, no red flags, and yeah, there is some scattered junk in there, but it's not ridiculous.
Sure. Yeah, I think just maybe that just points out the importance of getting to know your municipal source if you're going to kind of pursue something like this. I know other municipalities, thinking like what I've seen down in Virginia Beach, for example, like all their yard waste is bagged in plastic bags, which every time I'm down there, like, why is this the policy down here? But I imagine a lot of those, bags end up in the compost. So anyway, just thinking about, the importance of kind of looking back at what you're getting. And that's one of those things that I've talked with other folks around, like using hay bale containment, and just how a lot of that hay can be subjected to pesticides and things like that. And it's like, you're trying to get out in the marsh and you're trying to do a good thing, and it's like, you got to do a little bit of extra homework just to make sure. But it sounds like you did, and really appreciate the intentionality you bring to these projects and the information you shared. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. So just good to know your dealer for your compost fix for your salt marsh. And see another question in chat from Adriana. Adriana, you want to ask it in person, or you want me to read it off for you? I can go ahead and read it off. It was something that was on my list too. So Joe, can you speak to the permit requirements and information permit reviewers have had related to the compost addition aspect of these projects?
Yeah, I mean, part of all this work that we've been doing, like stepwise from small to a little bit bigger to a little bit bigger, it has been to sort of build that, like, evidence base and experience base to, so that, that it's got a track record, so that we can, more easily acquire permits. This work that I talked about was part of a permit modification for the dredge material placement. And so, there was, beyond like everything I've talked about so far, like as far as the testing and went into, that modification, but yeah, I can't say there was like, it's just sort of fit into the framework of the goals and the purpose of the dredge material placement. It was just, a different material. And I should say, this is just one potential material. I mean, you could use, as others have, upland fill or topsoil, or colleagues are working with this peat material that washes up on the shores of the Delaware Bay. So that, there could be, just alternatives, whatever it is, to raise elevation and sculpt that topography. But yeah, I don't have a whole lot of experience of hurdles as far as the permitting so far. but we're working on permitting another project, so we'll see how that one goes.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? And I'll ask one. Oh, Jonathan has another.
Oh, you can go ahead, Mike. I was just, while we have Joe, I figured I'd ask. Just thinking about that sort of continuum of elevations and how you've had that challenge kind of in between the mean higher high and the higher astronomical tide zone. I just wanted to confirm kind of what I heard from you was, that maybe that more fine-grained dredged material, and I've noticed this on other projects down here, really struggles to grow patents. And it's interesting that it might be, sort of due to that pore space issue. If there was a project looking to maybe sculpt a more convex marsh platform with, low and high marsh, would one way to go about it that would maybe more quickly vegetate be, say, bring the whole thing up to your low marsh elevation using your dredge material, and then where you want your high marsh cap, use sandier material or something. If it's not compost, maybe sand or something like that, and that's how you could kind of achieve that, assuming you didn't have too much compression. That's how you could achieve that quick vegetation. Is that kind of what I'm taking away from your observations?
Yes, that is what you're hearing. Yeah, that's exactly what, I hope to pursue at our refuge, is work with, as much dredge material comes our way. But tune it up to that, more conservative elevation, and get revegetation of spartina alterniflora, and then think of other ways to add that last little bit.
Okay, that's great. Just real world observation. I think certainly will inform our comments on projects, because with dredge material, it's like, let's get it vegetated, especially when you might have high wave energy events or something like that. You don't want to just all wash back out. So just thinking about ways you could kind of lead beneficial use projects to be more successful in that vegetative component more quickly is great guidance. So thank you.
Yeah. And anybody, like, I'm hoping to hear, some of these projects are, under the radar. And so anybody that wants to talk about, their experiences with a particular project, I'd love to connect and add dots to that graph and find exceptions to the pattern, just looking to explore it as much as we can.
Yeah, and I had a question along those lines as well. Just looking at some of the projects further down in the southeast, there's a lot of concern about using mixed sediments. So, like 45% sand and others fine organic materials, and placement, and then things winnowing out over time, the fine organics washing out and the sand persisting. Have you seen with a compost material that happening, or does the vegetation hold things in place? Does the compost persist over time?
Yeah, that's so far, we're a year and 3 months or so into placing this stuff, and it's holding tight. And that's like, my experience with these plantings and having plants that take off is really, I'm just, I'm a big fan of these plants because they really are like taking over. They are like, some of our mounds the elevation appears to be higher than it was when we placed it. And it's probably because of that root biomass, because it's quite a lot. We did below ground biomass when we were doing the experiments in the pots, because we just wanted to see if there was some difference in growth above or below, and just the amount of roots these things produce in just one season, at least under these favorable conditions, is incredible. And they're carrying the work forward, like they're building elevation.
Excellent. And then there's a question in chat from Linda, as far as if this research has been published so that it can be shared with other state permitting agencies, et cetera.
That is the intention, on the slow turning wheels of of my abilities. Yes.
Okay, great. And then a question from Aaron. Aaron, do you want me to read that, or do you want to come off and ask yourself?
Yeah, I was just curious if you compared any of your compost piles without planting, so that you would be able to compare like natural recruitment with the compost and the planted recruitment, or was it just everything was planted?
Yeah, we probably should have done that. I got to think we might. Yeah, it does look like yeah. That is a really good question, especially for Spartinopatens, because it just doesn't seem like a very good colonizer. I think we do have one mound that doesn't have vegetation, but actually, yeah, to tell you the truth, I've been kind of surprised at how slow some of the natural recolonization has happened in some of our bare patches. But yeah, that would be interesting to see. Maybe we'll do that on the next round. Just leave some blanks out there. But yeah, I'll say with that Cedar Bonnet Island site, it's just amazing how I guess we were in our 10th growing season this year out there. There is not a stem of Spartinopatens in that area. The Stickless, seems like the better colonized. Like it is there. I don't know if they planted it. I can't remember. And yeah, it seems to it seems to be the thing that takes over that bare space first. But yes, Spartinopatens is really particular, I think.
All right. Are there other questions from the folks? There's some comments in there about adding dots to the graph and sharing lessons learned. So there'll be additional opportunities to do that with additional restoration task force group work. Good to know with that. All right. Well, if folks have additional thoughts for the duration of this or questions, feel free to drop them into chat. We'll be on for a little bit. Joe, thank you very much for that excellent presentation. Great work. Looking forward to learning more about this as you move forward. And I think there's a lot of, really key points there that can be applied for restoration all along the coast, regardless of geography. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
So with that, we will stay online and conduct some of the regular CHaRRM business. This is an opportunity for folks